Two police officers walked into a diner and decided to ruin an old man's afternoon. What they didn't know was that the quiet man sitting in that corner booth had survived things they couldn't imagine. And his son was the one person on earth they should have feared. But this story isn't really about power. It's about what happens when someone with every reason to lose his temper chooses not to. Let me tell you about Henry Thompson. Henry was 75 years old and he still polished his shoes every morning. That detail mattered because it told you everything about the man. He had grown up in rural Georgia during segregation, the kind of childhood where drinking from the wrong water fountain could get you killed. His mother had taught him two things early: keep your dignity clean and never let anyone see you break. He carried both lessons into Vietnam at 19 years old. He came home at 21 with a Purple Heart, 3 fewer friends, and nightmares that would take decades to quiet down. The country he had bled for wouldn't serve him at a lunch counter. But Henry didn't become bitter. He became deliberate. He married a school teacher named Clara, raised 2 children, worked 31 years at the post office, and never once missed a Sunday at church. When Clara passed in 2014, he kept polishing his shoes every morning because she would have wanted him to. Now he sat at a corner table in Martin's Diner on the north side of town, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, his faded veteran's cap resting beside a small reservation card on the table. He was waiting for his son. Their Saturday lunch had been a tradition for 12 years, and his son was running 20 minutes late, which wasn't unusual given the nature of his work. Henry didn't mind waiting. He had spent a lifetime being patient. The door swung open, and Officers Daniels and Carter walked in, still carrying the restless energy of a slow shift. They ordered coffees at the counter, scanning the room the way cops do, looking for something without knowing what. Their eyes landed on Henry. He was the only black man in the diner. The neighborhood had changed over the years, but not completely. And Henry's presence at a corner table caught their attention the way a small irregularity catches a certain type of officer, the type that sees skin color before anything else. Daniels nudged Carter. Something passed between them. A look, a decision. They carried their coffees over to Henry's table uninvited. "Afternoon," Daniels said, but the word had no warmth in it. "You waiting for someone? Or just hanging out?" Henry looked up. He had heard that tone before, many times, across many decades. The tone that says, "I need you to explain why you exist in this space." "Waiting for my son," Henry said simply. "We have lunch here every Saturday." Daniels nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've already decided not to believe you. "You have some ID on you? Just routine." It wasn't routine. Nobody else in the diner had been asked, but Henry knew the physics of this interaction. Resistance creates friction. Friction creates heat. Heat gets people like him hurt. He reached into his jacket and produced his veteran's identification card. Daniels took it, examined it, turned it over. "This current?" he asked, as though a man's military service had an expiration date. "That's a lifetime card," Henry said quietly. Carter leaned in over Daniels' shoulder and studied the ID with exaggerated suspicion. "These aren't hard to fake," he muttered, just loud enough for Henry to hear. "You'd be surprised what people carry around trying to get sympathy." Henry felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the same heat he'd been managing since he was old enough to understand what the world thought of him. He let it pass. He had decades of practice. Daniels placed the ID on the table but didn't slide it back. He left it in the middle, like it didn't belong to anyone. "Here's the thing," Daniels said, lowering his voice as though he were doing Henry a favor. "We've had some reports of suspicious activity in this area. Loitering, that kind of thing. And I'm sure you understand that someone sitting alone for a long time can attract attention." Henry understood perfectly. He understood that suspicious activity meant a black man sitting comfortably in a space where Daniels didn't expect to see one. He understood that loitering was the word they used when they couldn't find an actual crime. "I ordered coffee," Henry said, gesturing to his cup. "I have a reservation." He nodded toward the small card on the table. Neither officer looked at it. "We're just doing our job," Carter added with a thin smile. No need to get defensive. Henry hadn't been defensive. He'd been seated, but he recognized the strategy. Reframe the calm person as aggressive. Make the peaceful man sound threatening. Build a narrative that justifies whatever comes next. The other diners had gone quiet. A woman 2 tables over watched from behind her menu. A young couple near the window exchanged uneasy glances. The waitress stood frozen by the register, a coffee pot in her hand, unsure whether to intervene. Nobody spoke up, Henry noticed. He always noticed. Daniels straightened up and crossed his arms. "I'm going to ask you to leave, sir, for everyone's comfort." The word sir was tactical. It allowed Daniels to claim courtesy later if anyone asked. "I'm not causing any discomfort," Henry replied. "I'm drinking coffee and waiting for my son. That's all I've done since I sat down." "And I'm telling you that your presence here has been flagged," Daniels said, his voice hardening. "You can leave on your own, or we can help you leave. Your choice." Henry looked at Daniels for a long moment. He had looked into the eyes of men trying to kill him in a jungle halfway around the world. He had buried friends in flag-draped coffins. He had held Clara's hand in a hospital room and watched her take her last breath. Fear was not something these young men could teach him, but pain was still possible. And pride had a cost. "I'm staying," Henry said. Carter moved first. He reached down, grabbed the back of Henry's chair, and yanked it backward. Henry stumbled to his feet, catching himself on the table's edge. His coffee cup rattled, his veteran's cap fell to the floor. Daniels stepped forward and placed his hands on Henry's shoulders, under the guise of a safety pat-down, pressing harder than necessary, pushing the old man slightly off balance. Henry raised his hands slowly, palms open, a gesture he had learned to perform decades ago because it kept you alive. Carter looked down at the veteran's cap on the floor. He stepped on it, not by accident. He dragged his boot across it, then kicked it under the adjacent table. "Wouldn't want anyone tripping over that," he said. Something cracked in Henry's chest. Not his composure. Something deeper. The hat was the last gift Clara had given him before her diagnosis. She had found it at a veteran's shop and had his unit number embroidered on the back. He wore it every day. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened, and for the first time his hands trembled. "Hands behind your back," Daniels ordered. "On what charge?" Henry asked. His voice was still steady, but barely. "Failure to comply with a lawful order. Resisting. Take your pick." Henry knew there was no lawful order. He knew resisting was the magic word that turned victims into suspects. He also knew that at 75 years old, with no witnesses willing to speak and 2 officers committed to their version of events, the truth wouldn't matter until much later. He put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. Daniels cinched them 1 notch tighter than necessary. Henry closed his eyes for a moment. Behind his eyelids, he was 19 again, crawling through wet grass with bullets cracking overhead, telling himself that if he survived this, no one would ever make him feel small again. He opened his eyes. Carter had picked up Henry's walking cane from where it leaned against the booth. He examined it with mock curiosity, then braced it across his knee and snapped it in half. The crack echoed through the silent diner. He dropped the pieces on the floor like trash. "Won't be needing that where you're going," Carter said. A woman at a nearby table gasped. A man by the window shook his head but said nothing. The waitress put down the coffee pot and pulled out her phone, pressing record with shaking hands. Henry looked at the broken cane, then looked at Daniels. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said. Not as a threat, as a fact. Daniels grabbed Henry's arm to march him toward the door. As he did, his elbow knocked the small reservation card off the table. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Carter picked it up. He read it. Then he read it again. The card was simple. White stock printed text. It read, "Resires, Commissioner R. Thompson, 12:30 p.m." Carter's face went blank. He looked at Henry. He looked at the card. He looked at Daniels. "Dan," he said. Daniels turned. Carter held up the card without speaking. The color drained from Daniels' face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Commissioner Robert Thompson, their boss. The highest-ranking officer in the entire department, the man who could end their careers with a phone call. And this was his father. Daniels released Henry's arm like it had burned him. He began stammering, "Sir, we had no way of knowing." Henry turned to face them. Handcuffed, disheveled, his cap crushed, his cane destroyed. He looked at Daniels with an expression that held no anger. Something worse. Clarity. "Would it have mattered," Henry said quietly, "if I were someone else's father?" Neither officer could answer. The diner door opened. Commissioner Robert Thompson walked in, still wearing his uniform, his badge catching the overhead light. Someone had called him. He took in the scene in 3 seconds. His father in handcuffs, the broken cane on the floor, the 2 officers standing like children caught in something they couldn't undo. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Remove the handcuffs," he said. Daniels fumbled with the key. His hands were shaking so badly that Carter had to help. The cuffs came off. Henry rubbed his wrists slowly, the red marks already forming. Robert picked up his father's cap from under the table. brushed it off gently, and handed it back to him. Henry placed it on his head without a word. Then Robert turned to his officers. "You didn't know who he was," Robert said. "That's what you'll tell me. That's your defense." "You didn't know," he paused. "So let me ask you something. If he wasn't my father, if he was just a 75-year-old veteran having coffee alone, would any of this have been acceptable?" Silence. "You are suspended immediately pending a full investigation. I expect your badges and service weapons on my desk by 6 o'clock tonight. If the investigation confirms what I've seen here today, and I believe it will, you will be terminated and referred for criminal charges. Not because he's my father, because he's a citizen. And you forgot that." Daniels opened his mouth. Robert held up one hand. "Don't." They left. The diner watched them go. Nobody felt sorry for them. Robert sat across from his father. The waitress brought a fresh cup of coffee without being asked. Henry wrapped his hands around it the same way he had before, as though nothing had changed. "You okay, Dad?" Henry took a sip. "I've had worse Saturdays." Robert smiled, but his eyes were wet. "I'm sorry I was late." "You're here now," Henry said. "That's what matters." They ordered lunch. They talked about the weather, about Robert's daughter's school play, about whether the corner hardware store was ever going to fix its broken sign. They didn't talk about what happened, not yet. That conversation would come later, privately, between a father and a son who both understood that the world still had a long way to go. The diner footage went viral that evening. Within a week, the department announced mandatory civil rights and de-escalation training for every officer. Daniels and Carter were terminated and charged with assault and deprivation of rights under color of law. The city council issued a formal apology. But Henry didn't watch the news coverage. He sat in his living room that night, holding Clara's photograph, his crushed cap on the side table, and thought about all the people who had endured what he endured that afternoon and had no commissioner's son walking through the door to save them. That was the part that kept him up at night. Not what happened to him. What happened to everyone else? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, respect isn't something people should have to earn by being connected to power. It's something every person deserves the moment they walk through the door.